Thank you for tuning in to Women in Games International Cheat Codes Podcast. I am your host, TaSh, and today I have with me poet and game producer Betsy Aoki and founder of ElisaCP Consulting, Elisa Camahort Page. Welcome to the show today, ladies.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. So before we begin, I'd like to have a few warm-up questions. And one of my favorite things to ask is, what has been the best part of this year for you, big or small?
Well, I have to say for me, and I mean, because I am in sort of full book promo mode, the book is behind me here. It was definitely one of the best moments to actually have a book of poetry in my hands and able to see sort of the fruit of many years come into shiny techno proof or whatever, right? It's a very, there's that new book smell too, which is not the same as reading on your Kindle or whatever. So I think that was definitely a great moment for me this year. It's been a very weird year, but a bright moment for me, for sure.
It's been a very weird 2 years, right?
Yes. And I would have to say that as a consultant, sometimes your business can be a little feast or famine. And 2020 was completely famine, like one fell swoop, because I'm also a speaker and a consultant. All my business kind of fell away. And I also felt a little paralyzed about, well, who wants to hear from me now to pitch them on my great services? It took a while to build back up. Last year was sort of getting going. And then these first 4 months of this year, I've been actually really busy, really operating maybe at almost full capacity with business. And I've forgotten what that was like. It's a challenging thing and a bright spot to be challenged.
I think that full stop was hard for a lot of us who were used to be perpetually busy.
Yes. Yes.
And then revving it back up again.
Once I got into a nice little groove about this quiet time, because I think I really I think I groove in the quiet parts. So now that everything's starting up again, I'm thinking, how do I people?
Well, there were parts of the pandemic that as a natural as an undercover introvert that works really hard at being outgoing and engaging with people, there was a part of the pandemic that was very appealing to me, which is I didn't travel, I didn't go anywhere, I didn't really see people, and that wasn't hard for me. And because I was already working at home, some of it already felt like not that much change, except for the world falling apart around us and the fear and anxiety, especially about other people like my parents. So there was part of me that did not mind the lockdown. Really, I was binge watched a lot of great TV and did my work and didn't miss all the peopling all that much.
Yeah, for us, we have chickens. We're urban chicken farmers or whatever, and you sort of knew what phase of the pandemic we were in when my husband trained the chickens. His office is on the first floor to hop up from the lawn onto the window and eat corn, and then partake in his video chat calls for work. Essentially, they became coworker.
Wow.
Right? But that's how far the standards have fallen or improved. I'm not really sure. Other people had cats wander through, offspring, stuff like that, but we had chickens.
That to me is a big improvement. I would like to see some chickens. Dogs and cats are cute and everything, but I would really dig seeing some chickens in one Zoom call.
I do that.
They're only comedy. They never get any smarter. They're just fluffy, and they're just, there's nothing serious about chickens.
I have a chicken phobia, but I do admit that if a chicken popped up during a Zoom chat, I would be really entertained, even with the phobia. I know the phobia makes no sense. I get teased about it all the time. So please give us and our listeners a little bit about your background, because we would love for them to understand why it's so important for you to be here right now.
I've been working as a technology lead or technology project manager for over 15 years now, essentially years and years. The culmination of that, or the artistic expression of that is the book that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. It's an interesting time that we're in. In other words, technology is taking on so much more part of everybody's lives, especially with the pandemic, especially having to rely on online means to reach each other. So it's a time of interesting technology commentary on humanity. But I think it's also an interesting time to acknowledge like the work that women have done all along in terms of bringing new technology to bear, working on technology projects now. I work in the game industry now as a game producer. There have been more women in games than people think, just like there's honestly more women in technology than people think. No one should feel like there's a barrier, or at least women should not feel like there's a barrier to them entering this profession. Like this is something that I feel strongly that women can do. They have done it, and sort of creating a work of art that expresses that I see you sentiment was really important to me. And I was lucky enough that it happened, like I said, this year, and I got to actually feel it in my hands or whatever and see sort of the fruit of that labor. So in some ways, it's completely separate from my career, the artwork that I do or the poetry that I write. On the other hand, this is like the first time that I've managed to intertwine the two and make the commentary both about technology and speak from, it's a persona, but it's a composite woman, essentially coder girl, who's speaking the poems throughout my book to try and synthesize the things that I've seen, the stories I've heard from other women, and my own experience to talk about like what it's like and that we're here and things are actually happening because of us. And so I don't know, that's a long rambly way of saying like I'm here to talk about I think some things that women in games will be interested in, but also sort of a non-workspace as well that might do well for them to explore outside of their day job or whatever, see what art can come from there and thinking about technology and games.
I love that because it's about bringing your full self, and I think you really demonstrated that with this book and also with your career in general. So I think that speaks volumes for a lot of women like me.
I actually started out in the arts. My first career that I pursued was in the arts. I decided pretty early on that the thing I thought was going to be my life's work, literally work, maybe I didn't really want to pursue that. So at the age of 25, it was liberating in a way. It could have been really scary, but instead it was, well, if I'm not going to do that, I could do literally anything because I don't know anything else and I've never tried. So I actually went into a totally different industry at first for a few years. And then because I live in Silicon Valley, I was like, obviously I need to give like this tech thing a try and see if I like it and see if I have aptitude for it and see if there's possibility for me. Now, I was pretty lucky in that this was during the boom times of the dot-com boom, the mid to late 90s. So there was a lot of opportunity, but we're not so far from that today. There are still boom times and in fact, in more cities than just the Silicon Valley area. So I got into tech. I took a step back and took the most junior entry-level role in a marketing department at a hardware company. And what I discovered is that because I found some mentors who were willing to teach me what I didn't know and sort of help me develop, and it was a boom time and lots of opportunity. And I was in a mindset where I was like, I really want to like buckle down. I want to work hard. I want to work. I am ambitious. And I'm tired of being poor, honestly, was tired of living very paycheck to paycheck. And so, I was able to advance. And the thing that I think discovered along the way, I did 7 years in telecom hardware, product management. You went from being the admin in a marketing department to the senior director of product management in another company, within the space of a few years. And then the bust happened and everything changed. And that's when I ended up starting both my own consultancy and then ultimately BlogHer with my two co-founders, and shifted from being in the hardware space to the internet space and social space. Before it was called social media. It wasn't called that back then when we started. And nobody thought women were using it. Certainly nobody thought women could monetize and make businesses out of it. Always this kind of evangelistic aspect to what we were doing, not only to evangelize to women who were using the internet and using what became social media, that they could do something serious with this, that they could raise their voices for a lot of different purposes, but also evangelizing to companies that they needed to pay attention to. Women were the power users of the internet. Women were the power users of social media. They were going to make or break your business, and you should be speaking to them, which nobody was. And then again, to the media to say, why are all your sources white dudes? Like, that is not who's all in tech and social and blogging and any of that. And, ultimately trying to evangelize to the investment community. Sadly, I will say, when we got our first round of funding in 2007, only 2% of venture capital was going to all women founding teams. And that number literally hasn't budged, which is somewhat disappointing. But something that struck me, and my spouse is a computer programmer, something that struck me all the way along is that my interest in the arts and the skills I developed in the arts were really applicable to my work in tech. And when, I talk to my spouse about computer programming, it's not about, it's like this part of it is about the writing of the actual lines of code. So much of it is about exploration, empathy for your user, collaborating with everyone you're working with. It's so much more than can you write lines of code. And there's elegant code and not elegant code. And, I really didn't know that much about that. But then I taught myself HTML and for the work I was doing. So, I do think that that's what so intrigued and delighted me about Betsy's book was to not only see my experience until I started Blog Her, I really was the only woman in the room, like 90% of the time, to not only see that experience laid out, but to see that coming together of one's artistic side and one's scientific technological side, and that really we need both. And I kind of feel today that we need to evangelize to future generations that you need both. To be, as you said, a well-rounded person in your whole self, but also to do a better job, just to do a better job.
That is absolutely true. We don't really improve without imagination.
Right. And creativity and empathy.
Absolutely. Those are key. So Betsy, I had a chance to go through Breakpoint, and I really enjoyed it, especially as a creative individual myself, and also someone who has passion for gaming and arts. It was really refreshing to see something so colorful, but also technical in parts. It was as if
there is Python game code in that. It was part of a class that I was taking. There's definitely game code in there in the code poems.
I thought that was awesome. I'd never seen anything like that, and it just really piqued my curiosity, and I just kept thumbing through it. And what I've noticed is that some of the most scientific minds are often some of the most highly creative people, and a lot of people don't really put those two things together. And I really appreciate your book, and I wanted to know, have you always been a storyteller?
I started writing poems and plays in kindergarten, so sort of yes, but not in my day job.
Do you remember the first type of poem that you wrote in kindergarten?
I think it had really bad rhymes. We were definitely in the 1800s phase of end rhyme, really bad rhymes.
I think that Breakpoint meets at the intersection of technology and also sensuality. And that was something that kind of was like a recurring thing. It's very sensual in parts, and I really appreciate that. And what was your goal with creating this work?
I think we touched a little bit about, the perspective of women in technology isn't often heard of, and the subsection of folks who are going to write about it is smaller than that even. Kind of what I wanted to do was kind of the way games are immersive, this is my world, or this is the world of my composite character, wandering through her job, wandering through the video game she's playing, her family heritage, folklore, speculation about the future and robot factories and so on, and try to give a kind of complete but gender flipped, or at least turning the angle of gender quite a bit, to talk about what it's like, because I feel like we hear a lot from, how intimidating technology is, or how male dominated it is, or whatever, and we don't hear the other kinds of perspectives. Some of it's dark, but I hope some of it was sort of playful as well. If you're playing with the technology and you're fooling around with code and you're finding different aspects of it that are intellectually or emotionally intriguing to you, it's not all grimdark, right? It's not all slogging through the mud here in the technology minds. It's actually people thinking about, irony, thinking about place, thinking about the ubiquitousness of having these devices everywhere. Kind of wanted them, like, welcome to my world, but kind of on the journey with me to sort of see what they could see about this place. And for folks who don't work in technology, I kind of hoped it was at least a good, not amusement park ride exactly, but at least enough to give you like the flavor of what it might be like to work in the environment. And also, like I said, the playful side, or as well as the darker parts, right?
What made you decide to use a composite character or like an avatar? That's also kind of a gamer thing as well.
I'm a Japanese Irish cishet woman. My experience is not going to cover everybody's. I saw a lot of things happen around me that made for different stories and different backgrounds. And I felt like it was more interesting if Coder Girl wasn't just me. I mean, there's a lot of me in the book, but I feel like there's a sort of broader story to tell. And I also feel like this isn't like the end. I would prefer to see like other folks writing about their experiences, especially women. I would prefer to see more works like this. So like, I don't think the book is the be all end all. I think it's just the beginning of a conversation possibly where other folks contribute their works as well, right? This could be a bigger discussion or a bigger genre than just my book, right? There's more to say. Composite was a way of sort of getting more diversity into a book that I wrote, but also I feel like there's just more diversity to be had, period.
That makes sense, yeah. And what made you decide on the title of Breakpoint?
Breakpoint is an important programming term. It's the point at which you are examining what's happening you set a breakpoint on a piece of code so that you can see where all the values are and what the state of things is at that point. When you're trying to debug something that isn't working, what you want to do is figure out where it was last working, and then at the point where it starts not working in the area you have to fix. Breakpoint means things to someone who codes or programs. It's a kind of investigatory concept, but it also, in the dictionary, it also has the feeling of breaking point, right? Like there's a point where you're done and you've had it, or things as usual are not going to operate that way anymore, right? And so I wanted both meanings. I actually had one of my university professors wanted the title to be Coder Girl Takes Over. So Colleen, I still remember, but when I put that up, I had sort of an informal focus group of women who worked in tech, and I texted them and I'm like, okay, I'm giving you a book of poetry about women in tech. Do you prefer Coder Girl Takes Over or Breakpoint? And everyone wanted Breakpoint. So I'm like, okay, it's Breakpoint. That wins. But it could have been Coder Girl Takes, like that's the comic book I think will be.
Coder Girl Takes Over.
The graphic novel will be
Yes.
will be Coder Girl Takes Over.
I really like the art on the cover of the book. Who's the artist that designed that for you?
That's Yejin Park, who lives in Seoul, Korea. And Yejin was not actually the original. I was originally working with another artist who had something happen in their family and could not actually create a whole new cover for me, but said, hey, I have this friend who already seems to have made somewhat of the thing that you're looking for. Why don't you go look at that? And I'm like, whoa, this is exactly the cover that I want. The cover in the background, but it really is a stunning cover, and it's the first thing people notice. So I think I did well by finding Yejin Park.
It is quite stunning. How did your Japanese American heritage figure into the writing of this book?
It figures into all of it. Because everything I do figures into all of it, I guess. Often when you construct a book of poetry, like the beginning section or the beginning poems have to kind of introduce you to the voice and the background of the speaker. If there's a speaker throughout the poems, or there's kind of a unifying theme, a lot of the who's this person talking like ends up in the beginning. And so a lot of the poems that are about my heritage I put in the front, because this tells you where I come from, right? There's a book about Japanese American internment camps in there. There's folklore, there's language lessons. It's really about setting the tone of there's a non-British background, I guess, speaking here.
It does figure out the things that we carry with us all the time do figure into especially the creative work that we do. And that makes sense. One of the poems in your book referenced video games. Well, actually, referenced Planescape Tournament, Halo, The Witcher. How much impact have video games had on your writing?
I think video games have had a decent amount of impact. I think in part the video game poems touch on the fact that often the gender of your hero character is already selected for you. And the Witcher one especially tries to send that up with a female Witcher character. And Planescape Torment actually is a game where you start off as the eternal bro. Essentially, I don't know, like the constantly resurrected hero, anti-hero person. And it's just, you have to put on the shell of that male character just to play the game. And I tried to write poems that Planescape Torment and Witcher that kind of undermine that. Video games are a very powerful medium, I think, and so they probably affect a lot of us in more ways than we think about. And again, that's kind of the direction where I'm going is, can we create art that reflects the technological landscape that we're in?
You remind me of what I think is a seminal work, Reality is Broken by Jane McGonigal, which talks about role-playing, massively worldwide role-playing games as being an example of people coming together to fight for common goals and to learn to collaborate. And she said, instead of asking why are kids wasting their time playing video games, maybe the video games are better than reality. Maybe it's reality that's broken, and maybe we could incent and reward people in reality the way, it's the whole gamification thing, right? But her book is such a great exploration of that topic that I really enjoyed, and makes your point exactly about the promise of video games and how we behave within them, and how much better than if they could also be more representative of the wide world of people who want to play them.
And something about a soldier, when you take on the persona of a super soldier as a way to blow off steam, that's really interesting to me. One of your poems, Slouching Like a Velvet Rope, was selected in 2021 by Pulitzer Prize winner Jericho Brown for the Auburn Witness Poetry Prize. Can you please read that poem for us now?
Sure, we'll see if I can beat the background noise here a little bit.
Okay.
It's called Slouching Like a Velvet Rope, and it's a poem really about being, the only one of your kind in the room. And so when I read it for the Auburn Witness Poetry Prize reading, where I got to read with Jericho Brown, which is another intimidating moment because he went first, and that should never happen. But it was really dedicated at that time to the folks who have to enter that space by themselves and know they're kind of the only one of their kind. So here we go. Slouching like a velvet rope. Yesterday, my name was Power, Adapter, Toaster Jockey, Tag Spinner. Today, it's Anger and Liquid Mercury evading reach. Tomorrow, I'll be breaking the rules by showing up, elbows on the table, scared to my sneakers of getting fired. Being the girl who leans forward into everyone's face instead of ornamental. If you show me your newest phone, I might brain you with mine. Dig out your skull and put a chip in instead. All a gadget wants is to be turned on and stroked, lips against its glass surface. It reflects someone else's face. A gadget is not a woman. No one will notice that it isn't you in there. Just like no one noticed that my name isn't that girl. And I didn't come here from marketing. I flew in full frontal from engineering. And I still have no idea whether the background noise killed that or not. So
It did not. Flew in full frontal from engineering. That part still gets me. I like that.
Yeah, one of the women engineers on my current team said this essentially described her entire career as a software engineer. So I felt gratified that it actually reached the folks who have been in that position as well. Not that I haven't been in that position, but especially folks like her who are constantly proving their technical chops over and over again.
It takes something which could be a very small moment, or a moment where you could feel small in a space so big, but it also turns it on its head and it makes it empowering. And I think that's quite beautiful, the way that's woven. I think I really love that one.
I would say thank you, because like I said, it's definitely meant for the folks who have to do that work, who have to sort of be in that meeting, sit at that chair, be at that table, and try to keep their sense of self. I'm trying to say, like, I see you, right? And also really stand in your power, I guess. It would be my hope, right? That you can turn that situation into one where you feel like you are at that table, you do belong there, there are things you have to offer, go say them.
I noticed that you dedicated your book to women in tech making it happen, and who you would like to see. You said that you kind of want to say, I see you to people. But this question is for both of you. You both mentioned that sometimes you are often the only women in the room. So what advice would you give to other women who are just starting their career in tech?
My biggest advice always when you're starting somewhere is to not look for a mentor, but look for lots of what I call thin slice mentors. It's that Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers. Early on in my career in tech, one of my bosses was really great about including me in conference calls or meetings where my level didn't determine, I wasn't appropriate for me to be there, but they wanted me to learn. And one of my other people who were on my team who were much senior to me really wanted me to understand the tech before I wrote about it. And I was doing some technical writing, and so whiteboarded it out. So when I went to my next company, I was learning a whole new technology. I'm like, who are the engineers here who love to talk about what they do and would love to teach me if I'm a willing and eager student? And I found for a couple of different aspects of the technology, I found someone who would just, give me an hour in their office with the whiteboard. I wasn't asking people to commit to be some long-term mentor for me. I was asking them to tell me what they knew so that I could do a better job for them. And I spread it out amongst lots of different people. All of those folks were men, by the way. All of them were, in fact, if I think about it, all of them were white men, and they all helped me. And that helped me advance. So it's great. It would have been great to have role models that looked like me. But in the absence of that, I went and asked the dominant demographic, I went and asked people for help. And I think that that's something you can always do. The other thing I always say is, do not be afraid to ask the quote unquote stupid question. 9 times out of 10, there are a bunch of other people in the room who don't know the answer either, and they're just fronting. And as soon as you get someone to answer, everyone writes the note down. And I think it actually projects so much confidence and strength to be willing to show that kind of, you must know your shit in general. And obviously you must feel okay about yourself if you're willing to be like, hey, I guess I missed that day in school. Like, what is that? And I think it's actually a sign of strength and confidence. And you get the answers, and everybody else usually needs them too. I mean, walk in the world as though, ask yourself, in Silicon Valley, what I often say to women is ask yourself, what would a white guy in a hoodie do? And go do it. Some people won't like it. I'm not saying some people won't be put off. The data show that yes, some people will be put off by a woman behaving that way, but I still truly believe the majority will not. And that it will help you grow and learn and be seen and be heard and be accounted for.
I think there are a couple of tricks that I can offer that are practical. One is, depending on how long it would take to walk you through something, you may or may not use this in a meeting, but, hey, I've come to this situation later, or I just started attending this meeting. Can you give me like a 2 or 3 sentence walkthrough of where we're at right now? Which does not take your power away, is a fair enough question. If other people are coming in late to the meeting, like late to the call or whatever, then you're in good company. And it's a reasonable ask, right? Because you're not derailing the meeting or stalling the meeting in any way. You're just like, let's just set the framework for this meeting about what we want to get done. That's a program manager, producer trick. The other thing is that I found often, if it's a very controversial or tense meeting, or the working meeting is going to decide something important, the pre-meetings are actually the meeting, right? So especially possibly at larger companies, but even I think at startups, if you talk to the players who are trying to decide something first, and either present your data to them early or get a feel for what they're going to say early, then it's not really a weird situation of you being alone in the room. You kind of already know the landscape, and if you have to make an argument that's counter to what everybody's expecting, then at least you know where people have to be moved from, like the position they have to move from to get to where you are. Right?
Yeah, you'll hear this term socialize. got to socialize that. And all that means is that you are going beforehand and talking to people individually. And it's very similar to activism and advocacy, socializing ideas, rounding up support, knowing where people stand, kind of understanding ahead of time what pushback you might get. I was just helping someone prep for a meeting last week, and I'm like, okay, these are not my questions. These are the questions I think you will get from the people who are going to be in that room. So be prepared to stand by what you're proposing here and to answer these questions. I don't know that all those questions will come up, but having worked with the folks long enough, I suspected that concept of socializing something is about all that kind of work you do before the work.
I think too, back to what Elisa was saying about a mentor, if you actually have someone that you trust in certain key meetings with you, they can be your meeting buddy and tell you how things went, right? Like in this podcast, I can ask Elisa later, like, how'd it go? Because you saw what I looked like while I was throwing my hands around or, trying to get rid of the background noise or whatever, right? Like these are things that you can't know because you're performing in the moment. But like if you have a buddy who's at least trying to help you say how you came across, maybe in your mind you came across less assertive than you did, they can call you, to account and say, no, actually it went fine, right? Because you may stew about it forever if you don't have that objective feedback, right? And you don't want to ask everybody how you did. You want your trusted meeting buddy to tell you. But it's good to have a meeting buddy or a mentor that can kind of help you negotiate weird meetings.
Do you think it's become a little bit more difficult with everyone kind of doing more things virtually to socialize ideas and socialize things, or does it make it easier?
I would say everybody has way more meetings now because we can't accidentally run into each other. So there's more snappiness. You have to be a lot more quick, I think, because people are having meeting fatigue. And if you can actually do the start 5 minutes late or end 15 minutes early or whatever, actually people appreciate that because they have been staring at a screen for like 8 hours a day, and like they need at least the eyeball rest, if not the mental rest, right?
That's true. The mental rest. People often forget that the virtual meetings are just as training as well. Elisa, I'd like to talk about Roadmap for Revolutionaries, Resistance, Advocacy, and Activism for All, which is your book. And I really like that it is a practical guide for becoming active in social justice. How was this idea born?
Well, Blog Her was acquired in 2014, and I stayed with the acquiring company for almost more than 2 years. But towards the end of 2016, I was starting to feel like it was time for me to move along. I had been thinking about writing a book. A week before the November election, I went to the CEO and pitched a graceful transition to support them for the next 6 months and then sort of move along. And I had a book in mind. And it wasn't this book. It was a totally different book. But then the election happened, and that kind of threw a lot of uncertainty into what I thought the next 4 years were going to be like. And I observed a couple of things. I observed that a lot of my friends I had always kind of been interested in politics and activism and talking about politics on social media. I was a political blogger for a while, but I saw a lot of my friends who had never been political who were super amped up and were very engaged. And I was afraid that they might burn out. I was afraid it was unsustainable. I was also afraid that when the midterms came along, they'd either get what they want and get complacent or not get what they want and give up. So these are the things I was kind of thinking about and worrying about when one of my co-authors, Carolyn Gerin, came to me and said she had an idea, and it was to create she likened it to the Girl Scout handbook, the sort of a very episodic, here is a bunch of different challenges you may face or ideas you may have, and here's how to pursue them. Like, here's how to look into it more deeply. And then I invited Jamia Wilson to join us as a third co-author so that we had some, Carolyn and I were both from Silicon Valley, both very similar demographically and psychographically. So I was just like, we needed some more variety and diversity in our team. And Jamia has been in the advocacy movement. Like I'm a dilettante compared to her, right? And so that's how the idea came about. And we knew right away we didn't want it to be about Washington, D.C. and Congress. And I think Trump's name is mentioned maybe twice in the whole thing. It's not about him. It's about, if you're fired up, how can you become more effective and integrate activism into that? We always talk about work-life balance. Well, I want work-life activism balance. And if you're fired up now, how to keep that fire going and not, keep it something in your life forever now to activate around the things you care about. And it doesn't have to look one way or be in one area or be anyone else's vision of what your activism looks like. You get to choose. It's choose your adventure.
I like that you said choose your adventure, because it's one of my favorite things. And you're right, there is a fatigue that comes along with it, because it's a lot. And if you're like me with ADHD, sometimes you get project paralyzation, where you see that it looks so big and you're thinking,
yes,
okay, I'm not even going to start.
Right.
But when you make it cut the elephant into bite-sized pieces, it seems more doable, and it seems like something that people can easily get behind. So,
well, I also think that one of the most important things is that you have to triage. You can't. I often say, I get up in the morning, I'm upset about 25 different things going on in this country and in this world, but I can't possibly be an effective activist. I can't possibly be a leader. I can't possibly be educated on all those issues. So I have to pick the top, let's say 2 or 3 at most, that I'm really going to dig deeper on and be more of a leader on. And then if I care about these other issues, which I do, then who are my sources? Like, I don't have to keep on top of net neutrality myself, but if the EFF says it's time to call my senator, I'll go call them. I'll go do this action. I'll do a task, and if you try to, as you say, if you try to tackle the entire elephant of what you want to happen in the world, it is overwhelming and it's too much. And so triage is like the first step for anybody who wants to have something sustainable activism practice.
That's much appreciated. What do you feel the number one mistake people make when they're trying to be an ally or they're speaking out for social justice?
There's a whole chapter in our book about how to be an effective ally that Jamia really took the lead on. And I think one of the most important things is, first of all, if you get really hyped up about a topic, go Google is your friend. Find out who's already been working on it and find out who's been working on it from the community most affected. So if you are really into LGBTQ rights, go find organizations that are LGBTQ led and run. If you are really hyped up about Black Lives Matter, go find organizations that are Black led and run. Go find who's doing the work on the ground already, and not necessarily the national organizations. Who's doing it where you live? I'm a big proponent of local matters. Local matters more than anything. Any problem we have in Washington, D.C. bubbled up from local to county to state to region to national. And it started there. And you can see the effect of your work much more directly and clearly when it's in your locality as well. So for example, take the refugee crisis. There's probably an organization in your locality that's in charge of welcoming refugees that are brought to your area and helping them get settled and set up. And you could actually volunteer right there in your own community to make refugees more welcome. Just as an example. So I think the biggest mistake is we try to, be saviors to people who are already doing the work. I also think that we make the mistake of thinking if we can't be perfect, we shall do nothing because we don't want to be called out. And I would say that nobody is perfect. One of my friends is Natalia Oberti-Noguera, and she is queer, Latina, millennial, she runs Pipeline Angels, which gets more women and women of color into investing. And she has this talk that she's given about even she, who is so inclusivity minded, everything she thinks about is inclusion. But when she had an employee who had a disability, she learned about her blind spots and that it was extremely educational. Now, sometimes your initial response is to say, well, why am I being asked to care about this? That's such the minority problem. I really want to tackle these big problems. But that's the exact point, is that you listen to everybody, hear everybody's needs and make better decisions. And if you miss something, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you had a blind spot that now that you've, as I think Maya Angelou said, once you know better, you can do better. It's an opportunity. And if you are in that mindset, that is your opportunity. So I think that's probably the biggest mistake, other than overwhelming themselves, not triaging. I think it's the thinking they have to be a perfect savior to do anything.
What you said kind of definitely feeds into my next question, which is what is one practical step that we can all take right now to be revolutionaries? And you mentioned starting local, and that's something that I have not considered myself. And I think that's quite brilliant. Is there any other tip, like a small tip that you can give us all?
And I would say when you start local, there's so many positions locally that are elected, sure, but there are others that are appointed. Any issue you care about in your locality, there's probably a commission or a committee or a task force that reports to either your city council, your county board of supervisors. Like, dig into your local government even because they're usually pretty desperate for people to do this work. Triage to me is the number one. Number two thing is to find who's already doing the work and join and support them, not necessarily create your own thing that isn't actually needed and might be dilutive. The number three thing is to broaden your perspective on what contribute means. I think most people feel like it's money, and if I can't donate money, like how else can I contribute? And I've been through feast and famine on income, and I've long ago decided on a set percentage of my income I donate each year, not a dollar amount. So when my income is less, yes, I donate less, but I'm always giving what I call my personal tithe. But you can also contribute your skills to organizations, contribute all the technology in your technology graveyard. Everyone has a room in their house where their old printer and old scanner or whatever is sitting. Like, there are organizations who would love that. You could contribute your time. You could be texting, you could be calling. And I would also say that not everyone can get out on the streets in March. So when you do, if you have the physical capacity and time to join marches and vigils and protests, you are contributing in that way, because not everybody has the capacity or capability to do so. So broaden your perspective on what contribute means and carve out, if it's money, great money. If it's time, great time. If it's your skills, if it's your body, whatever it is, get it out there and contribute what you have to contribute. You don't owe anybody else an accounting what you are contributing and why and where and when. So be sure you're doing it to match your values, align with your values. That's what matters the most.
Having accountability to yourself.
Yeah.
Most of all. I want to talk a little bit about BlogHer, and I am curious, what inspired you to start that platform?
Well, so back in the early aughts, blogging was really niche. And then when it started to become paid attention to by the mainstream media, I really noticed, and my two co-founders noticed, that all the sources, all the links that were being shared, all the people that were being talked to were white men, white male bloggers. And, we thought, this is a new media with so many fewer barriers to entry. And everyone's talking about how it's democratized and blah, blah. My least favorite word, meritocracy. And it would be a real shame if this new media began to look just like the old media. And so I met my two co-founders that we did not have prior, like we hadn't worked together. We didn't know each other. I met one of them conference, and I met the other because a mutual friend introduced us. And we started out we decided to throw a conference that was like any other blogging conference, but all the speakers and experts would happen to be women. And it was not to talk about being women, but to be women talking about technology blogging or political blogging or business blogging or personal blogging. And it was just a labor of love. It was just a project. And I really recommend, if you're thinking about starting a company with someone, identify a project, a short-term closed-end project. See how you actually work together. Probably save a lot of doomed partnerships if people did a little pre-socialization, right? So we did this conference, and then we sat in, it was Lisa Stone and Joy Desjardins and I, we sat in Lisa's kitchen, and we're like, wow, there was so much passion, so much interest. What should we do next? And so we did decide to start a company, and it became more of a media network for women creators. We kept doing the conferences. We had our own web hub for talking about what women were doing online. And we created a publishing network where we acted as publisher for all these women creators so that they could monetize what they were doing, which was somewhat of a radical idea in 2006 when we launched the network. And then we later started doing some research as well and developed a proprietary backend content and campaign management system. And but I think that it was great to have co-founders, to have them have complementary skills. We all came from like different areas. We had different strengths. Together, we were like one superpower. And we people talk a lot about this radical candor now, but I feel like in a lot of ways, we just kind of naturally gravitated towards things that now are really normalized, like caring about inclusivity, like being able to be having radical candor with one another, because your partnership will fail if you can only have the easy, fun conversations. You have to have hard conversations, which, in running a business, you're going to have. So we ended up, raising 4 rounds of funding, selling the company. I just spoke on the phone to Jory the other day and had dinner with Lisa last week. So we're still really tight. And people used to say to us all the time, oh, you're still running the company together and you're all women. And I was like, how many partnerships, like many founding partnerships break up before we got bought, it was 9 years. Many founding partnerships, most founding partnerships aren't the same from day 1 to day 9 years. Nothing to do with gender at all. It's just really hard. Just always thought that was really interesting that people were shocked that we could somehow sustain a profitable business relationship over the long term being women. And I was happy to prove people wrong.
I'm very happy you proved them wrong. You needed to.
Yeah.
What do you think the keys to success were in moving from an idea, from a conference and a labor of love to a company, a venture-backed company, to an acquired company, which is something that not many all-women teams have done?
I think, so I mentioned 2 of them. We had very complementary skills. And I think 3 is a great number because here's what I always said. If I think Lisa and Jory are 2 of the smartest people I know, and I can't convince them I'm right about something, I maybe have to sit with the fact that I'm not right. Like there's always going to be a majority with 3 people, and you're always going to have the chance to bring someone over to your opinion. If you can't do it, it's probably not the right thing. And also with complementary skills, we're not chest beating for our ideas because we're all expert in the same thing. I see that a lot with male founding teams that are all male engineers. Like they're all experts in the same thing. So it becomes much more, I think, personal about which way they decide to go because it speaks directly to a shared expertise. And so we were happy to have each of us be leaders and sort of taking the lead on different aspects on the things we were most expert on, and then going to the other 2 for intelligence, an outside perspective, more wisdom. It's that same lead and support thing that I talked about with activism. I think understanding the balance of where you lead and where you support and what your role is in that is important in a lot of areas of life. We'll also say, again, as I said, you have to be able to have the tough conversations, not just the easy ones. And you have to have the same work ethic. And that doesn't mean you all have to be type A, 80-hour-a-week people. But if one of you is and somebody else isn't, there's a lot of we avoided a lot of the underlying resentments that chip away strong partnerships by following these kind of 3 things. But I also think that the other thing is it's just listening more than talking. I think listening to I'm sure Betsy knows this well from, developing things like games. You have a passion. If you have a passionate user base, first of all, you should want a passionate user base. If they're not passionate, you are not differentiated. Your passion equals differentiation. So listen to what they say. You can never make everybody happy, but you can really start to build a prioritization of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it based on listening to what your passionate customers say and want and what they're asking for. And I know everyone likes to talk about Steve Jobs, or people like him who supposedly created things that we didn't know we needed, and most of us are not going to be Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or any of those kind of folks. Like, we are trying to build a business based on making something our customers want and need, and trying to, yes, be a few steps ahead and anticipate. But I think sometimes people get a little too into the black turtleneck mode and think that if they're not creating something people are actively resistant to, then they're not really innovating. And I just think that's bizarre, so I think that's one of the things that, and the last thing I will say is you don't hold your cards close to the vest. Ask for help. Tell people what you're working on. You never know where help is coming from. And I know so many people who are like, oh, but I don't want to give my idea away. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Somebody already has your idea. I guarantee you it is, will they make their idea real? And you need other people to make your idea real. You never know where your next investor, your next employee, your next customer is coming from. And we spend all this time being protective. And there are very, very, very few ideas that are really worth protecting like that.
That's very true. You spoke about how you each had a different skill set. And one thing that I probably am guilty of myself is sometimes when you all have the same level or the same skill set, it's very easy to take any disagreement as an insult to your intelligence.
Right.
And then there's no progress in conversation because you feel demeaned or put down, even though that
right.
may not necessarily be the case.
Right.
So that, I think it's a great idea to have people who are really great at what they do and people who you can defer to for different things. That is key.
Deferring is very good for the ego. It's a nice way to keep yourself in check when you realize there are people to whom you should defer on different topics.
I have a question for you both, and Betsy, you could answer first. If you could go back in time with a message for your 12-year-old self, would you? And if you would, what would that message be?
I think 12 years old, I would probably say really hold fast to both things that you're interested in, because I've been interested in writing and computers in a sort of dual method. I do not have a computer science degree, and there was a advisor when I was at UC Berkeley who actually steered me into the English department. I think he wanted me for his department versus taking on computer science. So while I'm not 100% sure whether I should have taken computer science at that time, like I'm not sure whether I was ready to do that, it would have certainly helped later, dual majoring or whatever. And so like at the time I didn't see that for what might have been, sexist expectations or whatever, or just he wants more smart people in his department. But like, it's possible to be, as they say in D&D, like dual class, right? Like double wielding. You could actually be both the MFA computer science person. And I think it's worthwhile to give all parts of your brain access to priority, right? In terms of your learning or in terms of your experience. Like, you don't have to typecast yourself into one thing or another. You can just go where your brain goes and then see how that works.
First of all, I'm super not into, like, when people say, oh, if you knew then what you knew now, what would you do differently? And I'm like, it's almost an impossible question, because I would probably say to my 12-year-old self, you got it. Like, shit's going to happen and you're going to make choices, and not everything, things are going to be hard sometimes, a lot of times actually. And your instinct is fine. Like, go with it. Is it always the perfect choice? I don't know. How could I know? But it all turned out okay. And you just kept following your gut of what to do. And you just kept, I think of life as there's this river going by me. There are different opportunities I could jump on. And I chose to jump on some and not others. And, that turned out okay. And when I was wrong, I could jump off whatever I jumped on and jump on something else. And I've done that too. And that if I really advise anybody, I'm like, never think of anything as like the final decision, the final exit, a one-way road with no you can always change. I've had 6 careers. They were all fine. They all gave me things and didn't satisfy some things. And when I had to change, I changed. And, sometimes I had a lot of money and sometimes I didn't have any. And sometimes I saw a clear path to success, and sometimes I didn't. And, so I just kept following my instincts, and, it was okay. It was fine. It's been fine.
Switching gears a little bit, I would love to know what fills your cup. What makes you happy?
Oh. I have to say there's the lockdown happiness and just general happiness. During lockdown, I have to say TikTok brought me a lot of joy. Like just watching cute animal videos and dancing videos. Like I just think they nailed the algorithm for me like no other platform has. And it just really was soothing to me sometimes we don't give social platforms credit, where I'm all about God, I wish I could get off Facebook and Twitter is accessible and like all these things, but sometimes we don't give it credit. And I just want to give TikTok credit. But other than that, what fills my cup is, when I see positive change happen, and you have to hold on to that, because we are always one step forward. I don't know how many steps back. I mean, the step forwards don't go away. That's, except for repro rights, I guess, which is soon to go away. But, in general, you get something and then the backlash happens when you care about social justice, when you care about equity. And if you don't hold on to the things that have changed, the things that have gotten better, the things that are irrevocably changed. I mean, I think some things are irrevocably changed. They say when you see something, you can't unsee it. Well, I think that happens to populations of people. And many times the backlash creates that. When you see it, you can't unsee it. I always think of that scene in Ava DuVernay's film Selma, when it showed all the white people watching on TV while the people crossing the bridge were getting beaten up. And that the implication was they saw something they couldn't unsee. And I do think that happens. And so, I hold on to how I felt when marriage equality came out of the Supreme Court, or, those kinds of things. Seeing Kamala Harris swear in Ketanji Brown Jackson. I mean, like these moments, they can't take those away from us. Those moments happened, and those are joyful moments. And if we don't take the joy in them, we're not fueling ourselves. We need to fill our cup. That was a long-winded answer, but there's a lot that does fill my cup. What about you, Betsy?
A lot of people need to hear that, though. A lot of people need to hear to not forget about the progress that was made when we're thinking about the bad things too.
Yeah.
I think for me, like the smaller things became, this is just pandemic commentary, but smaller things became more important, and the victories more like discrete. Like if I could get out and walk every day for like 30 minutes, because I couldn't go anywhere. But if I could walk my neighborhood for 30 minutes, which is very steep hills, then I've done a thing, and it is a good thing. And as mentioned before, it can't be taken away. I've done a thing, right? And so sort of looking for the things that you can do, I got better at that. And then also I sort of got better at like excusing, like, okay, I'm going to read, a trashy science fiction or fantasy novel now, because my brain needs to rest, right? Like I cannot think about like horrible, dire things. I need to take some kind of break, or I won't have the energy to go do the things I need to do, right? I think everybody learned how to bake bread during the pandemic. Everybody, realized exactly how messy their closets were. We figured out the limitations of where we live, right? So I feel like there was sort of a lot of self-improvement things that kind of helped fill certain kinds of cups, but I think also just like small moments of grace were very important. Either grace you gave yourself or grace that other people gave you, because we were all going through this horribly tough time, right? And I think the lesson from the pandemic is going to be carrying that forward, right? Like we don't know what someone at work is going through. We don't know what the person on the street is going through. Like it took the pandemic practice of saying you don't really know who, might have just died in their family or whatever. Like you have to think about like now, like that grace. And I think it's a more active practice of grace. We have to think about it.
I so agree about the small steps. When the lockdown first happened, I thought, oh, I'm going to read all this big pile of magazines. I'm going to read. And I found I couldn't read at all. I couldn't even watch anything long on TV, or anything on TV that was going to give me anxiety. Like I read the book Little Fires Everywhere. I really liked it. But when I started watching the series, the first episode made me so anxious. I was like, no. And I didn't read it all. 2020, I read 3 or 4 books for book club, a Zoom book club I'm in. And so in 2021, I got this little habit tracker app, and I put all these little things in there, and I put read 20 minutes a day. I read 85 books in 2021, and I'm on track to read about that many this year. And also, Betsy, because it doesn't all have to be important nonfiction and the world's best novels. I'm reading through Agatha Christie's oeuvre. I read all the Bones novels. I'm like, so maybe I'm not like trashy science fiction. Mine's more like trashy mystery novels, but I'm reading some light stuff too, to kind of, I usually have 2 or 3 things going at once. And one of them's pretty light. And I'm reading the Bridgerton novels right now. I'm just sort of, branching out and giving myself a break, I guess, about what I have to do.
Those breaks are important. I have not read it. I started a book in 2021. I didn't like it. And I said, I can't start another book until I finish that book. So now I'm stuck. So I don't know why I put that limitation on myself.
You don't have to finish it, TaSh. You don't have to finish it. You don't like it. You don't have to do anything you don't like. For leisure. I mean, maybe sometimes you do for work, but you don't have to do anything you don't like for leisure. Come on.
I need to move on. I need to break up with that book. Tell them it's not you, it's me. And, and let it go.
Totally. Absolutely.
I want to thank you both for appearing on this podcast. I would love for our listeners to know where they can find you, the way they can find your next project, anything else you want to share as we close out.
So my author website is BetsyAoki.com. So that's pretty easy. And you can also find me on Twitter occasionally, mostly tweeting about science fiction and fantasy writing, but poetry occasionally as well.
And I'm at ElisaCP.com. I have my podcast, The Op-Ed Page with Elisa Camahort Page. I have a newsletter. And I'm on Elisa C on Twitter and ElisaCP on Instagram. So I'm just all over the place on the web.
Thank you both for taking the time out to come to Cheat Codes Podcast, sponsored by Women in Games International. To stay up to date from the latest from WIGI, please remember to subscribe to Cheat Codes on Spotify and any other platform where you get your podcasts. And also, we are Get WIGI on all platforms. You can subscribe to our newsletter from there. Thank you so much for showing up, and we look forward to our next conversation. Thank you.